His lips were so close to my ear that I could feel the warmth of his breath before the words themselves. The music of the string quartet had softened to a murmur, and around us, the ballroom floor held a collective, silent gasp. His hand, resting on the small of my back, pressed just firmly enough to be an assertion of ownership. It was a gesture meant to pin me in place, a public claim disguised as a dancer's lead. "Don't close your eyes," Duke Dorian Blackwell whispered, his voice a low, intoxicating velvet. Society expected a blush, a flinch, perhaps even a tear from the grieving Duchess of Althea, so recently widowed, so tragically vulnerable. Lady Ellington's fan froze mid-wave, her eyes wide with scandalized delight. Lord Vance, a man who prided himself on his stoicism, visibly stiffened. They saw a wolf poised to devour his prey. But I did not close my eyes. I did not pull away. I held his gaze, my expression as serene and placid as the surface of a frozen lake. I registered the faint scent of sandalwood and something sharper, more metallic: ambition. This was not an act of passion. It was a move of calculated aggression, the same maneuver he had used to destabilize the Baroness of Crestwood last season. He was utterly, exquisitely predictable. The whispers began to ripple through the silence, painting me as either a fool or a fallen woman. Let them. If one wishes to command an audience, one must first give them a spectacle to watch. They thought they were witnessing the beginning of my surrender. They had no idea they were watching the beginning of his. His whisper lingered long after the music had resumed its rightful place in the ballroom. A phantom touch, a promise of intrusion. I let it follow me because a man who believes he is haunting you will never think to check who is holding the leash. Our next encounter was at Lady Harrington's annual art exhibition. I arrived early, deliberately. I chose a painting near the east wall, unremarkable, a bleak coastal landscape in muted grays, and I positioned myself 3 steps to the left of center. Close enough to the corridor that Dorian would need to pass me. Far enough from the other guests that a conversation would appear private. I opened my fan. I waited. He arrived 18 minutes later. I did not turn when I felt the air shift behind me. I simply moved, 1 small step to the left, adjusting my angle to the painting. Testing. His reflection appeared in the glass frame not 2 seconds later. He had followed. He believed it was instinct. It was a leash, and he had just pulled it taut. A bleak depiction of the coast. "Wouldn't you agree, Your Grace?" I asked, my voice even. He smiled, that slow, predatory curve. "Perhaps it is not the coast that is bleak, but the artist's perspective." A pause. Much like the whispers that followed our dance. Bleak for a moment I found illuminating. He was testing whether I carried shame. I offered him nothing but calm inquiry, holding his gaze 1 beat too long. No denial, no excuse, just silence, shaped like an invitation. He accepted it. Of course he did. Lord Ashworth's dinner was not an accident either. I had accepted the invitation knowing the seating arrangement would place Dorian 2 chairs from me, close enough for conversation, far enough for deniability. When he appeared in the library, his expression carried the unmistakable relief of a man who believes he has invented a coincidence. He had not. I had placed the atlas open on that particular page 2 hours before he arrived. I was simply standing beside the door I had already unlocked for him. He approached under the guise of condolences, speaking of my late husband with a carefully crafted reverence that bordered on insulting. Then came the true purpose. "The Nor Maritime Holdings must be a tremendous burden for you, Cassian," he said, his voice soft with false empathy. He placed his hand over mine where it rested on the open map. Beneath the warmth of his palm, I felt the cold architecture of his ambition. Most women would have recoiled. I let my hand remain. "The burdens of a duchess are many," I replied softly, my eyes on our joined hands. "But I am learning who to trust." I watched something sharpen behind his eyes. Satisfaction, heavy and premature. The final encounter of the season was designed to appear as fate. He arrived on the serpentine path on a magnificent black stallion, falling into pace beside me as if the morning had simply arranged itself in his favor. Here he dispensed with all pretense, speaking of power, of alliance, of two great houses securing a future neither could build alone. His gloved fingers brushed my wrist as he adjusted a loose rein. The touch was deliberate, possessive. He believed his pursuit was a masterclass. He catalogued each move as his own, the public spectacle, the private counsel, the fated crossing of paths. He was wrong. They were not his moves. They were mine, placed where I needed them, at the exact moment I needed them there. He had not been hunting me across the season. He had been following a map I drew. Dorian's confidence had become a tangible force, an invisible cloak he wore to every gathering. Society, ever fickle, was beginning to shift its narrative from scandal to inevitability. The predatory duke and the vulnerable duchess were becoming a story of a powerful union, and he played his part with relish. But the threads of a perfectly woven lie are taut, and a single pull can unravel the whole design. The first pull came during a late-night card game at the Duke of Devonshire's estate. Dorian, holding a winning hand, was speaking about a recent disruption in the eastern trade routes. "We will be redirecting the Nor fleet through the southern straits until the matter is resolved," he announced to the table, his tone one of casual authority. The use of "we" was subtle, but it landed like a stone in a silent pond. It was the language of a master, not an advisor. Lord Vance, ever loyal to my late husband's memory, set his cards down. "An interesting strategy, Your Grace. I was not aware the Duchess had made such a decision." Dorian's smile never wavered, but a flicker of ice entered his eyes. He leaned back, the picture of nonchalant power. "The Duchess relies heavily on my counsel. Her grief, as you can imagine, is a considerable distraction. I simply act in her best interests." The dismissal was smooth, patronizing, and utterly effective. It painted Vance as a meddling old man and Dorian as a selfless protector. Later that evening, Lord Vance sought me out by the terrace, his face etched with concern. He relayed Dorian's words, his voice low and urgent. "Your Grace, he speaks as if the holdings are already his. You must be careful." This was the moment for alarm, for tears, for a frightened plea for help. It was what any rational observer would expect. I offered him a serene, almost pitying smile. "Lord Vance, your loyalty to my husband's legacy is a comfort, but Duke Blackwell has been a great support. You mustn't worry." I watched the hope drain from his face, replaced by a deep disappointment. He saw a lamb, willingly walking to the slaughter. He bowed stiffly and retreated, convinced of my foolishness. He could not know that I had maneuvered Dorian into that very conversation, at that very table. Dorian's second mistake was one of pure ego. A week later, at the opera, the young Marquis of Stirling, a distant but well-meaning cousin, approached me to offer his condolences. As he took my hand to bow, Dorian, who had been speaking with a minister across the hall, was at my side in an instant. He didn't say a word. He simply placed his hand on my elbow, a silent, menacing act of possession. The Marquis, unnerved by the Duke's cold fury, stammered an apology and fled. It was not the act of a protector. It was the snarl of a beast guarding its territory. The whispers that followed were different this time. They were not about romance, but about control, about a man whose mask was beginning to slip. Dorian believed his arrogance was a display of strength, proof of his inevitable victory. He was so focused on the performance of ownership that he failed to notice who was in the audience. He saw Lord Vance, an old man. He saw a nervous Marquis. He never noticed the quiet man in the shadows of the card room, the one man whose signature was required to ratify any change in the Nor Maritime Board, Sir Julian Croft, the head of our company's legal trust. And Sir Julian missed nothing. Sir Julian Croft did not request a meeting. He demanded one. He arrived at my townhouse on a grey Thursday morning, looking more like a bailiff than a legal trustee, his coat still carrying the cold of the street. He refused tea. He refused a seat. He stood in the center of my sitting room and looked at me the way men look at something they are not certain is breakable, with caution and with the faint hope that it is not. "Your Grace," he began, "I have served the Nor family for 40 years. I watched your husband build that empire with his own hands." A pause, the kind that carries weight. Duke Blackwell now speaks of the holdings as if they are a dowry waiting to be collected along with your hand. His gaze did not soften. Society may be blind, I am not. He is positioning for a takeover, and you, forgive me, are permitting it. It was the first direct accusation anyone had spoken aloud. I let it settle in the air between us without rushing to fill the silence. Then I walked to my husband's mahogany desk and unlocked the small hidden drawer beneath the central panel. I did not produce the will. I was not ready for that. Instead, I retrieved two things: my husband's private ledger, open to his final entry, a payment authorized to the stablemaster, signed 2 days before his death, and beside it, I placed the codicil Dorian had filed with the courts, the document granting him controlling interest. I set them side by side beneath the lamp. I said nothing. Sir Julian leaned over the desk the way a surgeon leans over a wound, close, controlled, silent. I did not explain what he was looking at. I did not need to. Men like Julian have spent 40 years listening to paper speak. The silence stretched. 7 seconds, perhaps 8. Then his breathing changed. It was the smallest thing, a single exhale, heavier than the ones before it. His hand, which had been moving toward the ledger, stopped mid-air and remained there, suspended, as if contact itself would make it more real. His eyes moved between the two signatures with the slow, terrible focus of a man watching something he cannot unsee. He did not touch either document. "My God," he whispered. I had been waiting for those 2 words for 4 months. He straightened slowly, the color gone from his face. I gave him a moment, not out of kindness, out of precision. A man needs to fully arrive at a conclusion before you hand him his instructions. "I need you to verify the authenticity of every document Duke Blackwell has filed since my husband's passing," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. The voice of a woman discussing the weather, not the dismantling of a man. "Do it quietly. Bring your findings to me, and only to me." He stared at me for a long moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. The quiet, unsettling recognition that the woman he had arrived to warn was not the woman standing before him. He nodded once. Precise. Absolute. I had just deputized the most powerful legal mind in the city, and the most useful part was this. He believed the discovery had been his own, that he had come to rescue me and found the evidence himself. Let him believe it. A man fights harder for a cause he thinks he chose. I did not reply to Dorian's letter with one of my own. A written acceptance would be a document, a piece of evidence. Instead, I sent out invitations, 200 of them, on the finest ivory cardstock, announcing the Grand Althea Ball. It was to be the first major social event I had hosted since my husband's death, an official end to my period of mourning. To Dorian and to the rest of the world, it could mean only one thing. An engagement was imminent. The ballroom air was thick with the electricity of assumption. Whispers followed me like the train of my gown, a creation of midnight black silk, not the soft grays of mourning, but the deep, absolute black of command. Lady Ellington cornered me by the champagne fountain, her eyes glittering with insatiable curiosity. "Your Grace, you are positively radiant. We are all holding our breath for tonight's announcement." I gave her a small, enigmatic smile. "There is certainly an announcement to be made," I said, my voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. I let my gaze drift across the room, past the gossiping lords and ladies, to where Dorian stood, holding court like a conquering king. He was watching me. I held his gaze and gave the slightest of nods, a gesture of concession he had been waiting months to receive. His smile was one of pure, unrestrained triumph. My strategy was not to expose a crime, but to stage a confession. I had spent the afternoon with Sir Julian, not reviewing legal documents, but choreographing the guest list. Lord Vance was there, positioned near the orchestra, his worried face a testament to his loyalty. I made a point to speak with him. Patience is a virtue few men possess, my lord, I murmured, but it is the only one that truly matters. His confusion was a perfect counterpoint to the room's certainty. The young Marquis of Stirling was also present, near the terrace doors. I approached him and apologized for the Duke's overzealous protection at the opera, my voice carrying just enough to be overheard by his companions. I was seeding the ground, reminding the key players of Dorian's past transgressions. When Dorian finally approached me for a dance, the crowd parted as if for royalty. He took my hand, his grip possessive, his eyes alight with victory. "You have made me wait, Cassian," he murmured, pulling me close, "but I find my patience has been rewarded." "All things in their proper time, Your Grace," I replied, my hand resting on his shoulder. My touch was not that of a lover, but of an appraiser. I felt the tension in his muscles, the frantic beat of his heart beneath his starched shirt. He was intoxicated by his own success. "I believe we have a future to discuss, but not here." I let him lead the dance, guiding him in a slow, deliberate circle around the floor. He saw a woman surrendering to his will. I saw a condemned man enjoying his last meal. When the music ended, I did not release his hand. I tightened my grip. "My husband's library," I said, my voice a low command that cut through his euphoria. "There is a document there that requires your signature." He thought I meant a marriage contract. He thought he was being led to his coronation. As we walked through the throng of expectant faces, leaving a wake of silent awe, I knew the truth. He was being led to an execution. The library door clicked shut behind us, muting the orchestra to a distant thrumming heartbeat. The air smelled of old leather, and my husband's cigar smoke, a ghost at our private feast. Dorian's face was incandescent with triumph. On the desk, illuminated by a single green glass lamp, lay a stack of documents. At the very top was a deed of transfer. "My signature is all that's missing, I believe," he said, his voice a low purr. He reached for the pen, a conqueror claiming his spoils. "Not that one," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. He paused, his fingers hovering over the pen. I pushed the top document aside, revealing the one beneath it. It was the forged codicil. Beside it, I placed my husband's personal ledger. His smile tightened. "A sentimental gesture?" "An observation," I replied, tapping the two signatures. "You have a remarkable talent for imitation, Your Grace, but you gave my husband's hand too much strength. A dying man's signature falls. It does not rise." The blood began to drain from his face, leaving a waxy pallor. He straightened, his confidence hardening into a brittle shell of indignation. "This is an outrageous accusation. You have no proof, no witnesses." "But I do," I said softly. "You provided them yourself." I walked past him to the heavy oak door. I did not open it to escape. I opened it to issue an invitation. Standing in the hall, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern, were Sir Julian Croft, Lord Vance, and the young Marquis of Stirling. I had summoned them with a simple nod to a footman moments before we left the ballroom. "Gentlemen, please come in." They entered, the muffled sound of the ball rushing in with them before I closed the door again, sealing the five of us in the silent chamber of judgment. Dorian stared at them, then back at me, the first crack of true panic splintering his composure. I addressed the room, my voice as clear and cold as glass. "Lord Vance, you overheard the Duke at Devonshire's, speaking of my fleet as we." The Marquis witnessed the Duke's possessiveness at the opera, and Sir Julian, our most trusted legal counsel, has spent the last week verifying that every financial move Duke Blackwell has made was predicated on a lie. I turned my gaze back to Dorian. He looked from face to face, seeing not allies but jurors. He was trapped, not by law, but by his own orchestrated performance. Each public act of seduction was now reframed as an act of arrogant theft, confirmed by the very man whose respect he craved. The silence in the room was absolute. It was deeper than the absence of music. It was the sound of a reputation being hollowed out, of a predator realizing he had been walking through a gallery of his own crimes, curated by his intended victim. He signed, not with fury, not with threats, not with the performative indignation of a man who still believes he has options. He signed with the face of a man who has finally understood the shape of the game and recognized too late that he was never a player in it. The Morning Chronicle called it chivalry, a powerful duke honoring his fallen friend, returning the burden of commerce to the Duchess's capable hands. Dorian sailed for the continent 3 days later. The narrative followed him like a well-trained dog, obedient, useful, entirely his own invention. Let them write what they wish. Paper has always been more useful as a cage than as a record. I burned my husband's letter on a Tuesday morning, alone, without ceremony. No witnesses. No dramatic pause before the flame. The paper caught quickly, the way lies always do, once you finally hold them to the light. I watched until there was nothing left but ash and the faint smell of old ink. I did not cry. I had been crying for years without knowing it. Every time I was told to be careful, to be patient, to be grateful for protection I had never asked for, from men who needed me helpless in order to feel necessary. The holdings are mine. The whispers have changed their shape, and the only eyes I answer to now are my own. Dorian told me not to close them because he wanted a witness to his victory. He never understood that I was keeping them open to ensure he saw his own defeat. He never understood the deadliest weapon is the one they never see you wield. I keep them open